I was a quiet, unassuming wife, the perfect shadow to my ambitious New York husband, Adam. For years, I endured his subtle, then overt, disdain, culminating in the venomous phrase, "Sit down, you're a nobody." After I challenged his finances, this betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was rooted in a secret financial injustice involving my family's hidden legacy. Humiliated and pushed to the edge, I realized my only path to freedom and justice was to leverage the one thing he didn't know. I was quietly orchestrating a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate takeover, one that would not only grant me independence but also systematically dismantle the very empire he used to belittle me. I remember the exact moment the life I built with Adam, the polished, steel and glass skyscraper of a life, cracked. It wasn't a shouting match or a discovered text message. It was a single phrase, delivered with the casual brutality of someone swatting a fly. Adam had just closed a deal, a minor acquisition. Really, but he treated it like he'd conquered Wall Street. We were at a black tie benefit in Manhattan, the air thick with perfume, ambition, and the clinking of crystal. He was holding court, surrounded by his sycophants, and I, his wife, was standing quietly by the bar, his trophy, his background noise. I'd caught a whisper earlier, a small, uneasy tremor in his financials that morning. A six-figure deficit disguised as a strategic loss. My gut, the part of me he'd taught to ignore for a decade, screamed. I walked over. The smile I put on was muscle memory, practiced in the mirror of our penthouse apartment. I waited for a break in the conversation, the kind of professional courtesy he'd never extend to me in private. "Adam," I said, pitching my voice low. "Can we talk about the Montclair account? I just have a quick question about the Q3 projection." The change in his face was immediate. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was contempt. He didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes locked on his business partner, Mark. But he spoke so that everyone could hear. "Honey," he drawled, the words stretched thin and patronizing. "Don't worry your pretty little head about projections. Go fetch me another scotch, will you? Triple-aged, like my patience." That was the first crack. The humiliation in front of the city's elite felt like a physical slap. But I swallowed it. I always did. I turned to leave, my throat closing, and I heard his voice again, not meant for me, but loud enough for me to catch the chilling punchline. "Honestly, Mark," he chuckled, leaning in conspiratorially. "She barely understands how to balance a checkbook. Bless her little heart." I walked away, but I didn't get the scotch. I walked straight out of the ballroom, past the marble columns, and into the biting New York air. The cold hit me, and for the first time in years, the practiced smile finally shattered. My hands were shaking, not from the cold but from a rage that was quiet and deep. I didn't balance a checkbook. That was true. But Adam was confusing inability with secrecy. He thought I was dull, domestic, and utterly dependent. He had no idea the truth of my family's past, the reason I had always remained silent about money. He had no idea the legacy I was protecting. That night, back in our perfectly sterile apartment, I confronted him. The conversation was surgical, not chaotic. "Adam," I said, standing by the panoramic window, the lights of the city blurring into an indifferent fire. "The Montclair loss. It wasn't strategic. It was mismanagement, and it's putting undue pressure on the upcoming Dinsmore bid." He finally looked up from his tablet. His expression was a perfect blend of annoyance and boredom. "Don't be ridiculous, Amelia," he scoffed. "It's all handled. You don't understand corporate leverage. You're an artist, not a financier." I pushed back. "I understand what I see in the quarterly reports. And I know what my signature is tied to." He stood up, his height dominating the room, and walked right up to me. The malice was now undisguised. "Amelia, listen to me very carefully. You signed the prenup. You are a silent partner, and you will remain silent. Your role is decorative. It's to look good and not worry about things you don't have the capacity to comprehend." He watched my face, waiting for me to wilt, to apologize for being inconvenient. But something had shifted inside me at the benefit. The quiet rage was now a cold calculation. I met his gaze, and I held it. "And what if I don't want to be decorative anymore, Adam?" I asked, my voice barely a thread. "What if I know more than you think I do?" He laughed. A harsh barking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "No more? About what? About the value of this apartment? About the security of your lifestyle?" He takes a step closer. Amelia, don't be a fool. You have nothing. You brought nothing to this table except a pretty face and a naive signature. Then came the words. The 4 words that incinerated a decade of marriage and started a war. Sit down, Amelia. Sit down, you're a nobody. The coldness that washed over me wasn't shock. It was clarity. He had defined my worth. He had given me a role, a nobody. I realized then that my secret, the thing I had protected my entire life, my family's true identity and the financial trust fund I'd never touched, wasn't a shield. It was a weapon. And he had just given me permission to use it. He thought I was dependent. He thought I was poor. He thought I was oblivious. He was wrong on every count. I didn't sit down. I just stared at the man who had just dismantled me, and then I turned my back, walking to the bedroom. I knew what I had to do next. I had to move from being the nobody to being the one who knew everything. I had to turn my secrecy into his ultimate undoing. What would you do if you were me? Would you run? Or would you stay and fight a man who controls your life? Later that night, as Adam slept soundly, oblivious, I didn't cry. I pulled out a plain, sealed manila envelope from a lockbox hidden behind a loose floorboard. Inside, the documents didn't bear my married name. They bore the name I hadn't used in years, and they detailed a corporate holding company with a valuation that could buy Adam's entire world 10 times over. I was a nobody. We were about to find out who the real nobody was. The game had changed. And he had no idea he was playing. The silence in that room was the quiet before the financial storm. I closed the lockbox and slid the floorboard back into place. Adam was still breathing heavily, obliviously, on his side of the king-sized bed. He had no idea he was sleeping next to the majority shareholder of the company that was about to eat his alive. The next morning, everything looked the same, but the truth was, the world had fundamentally shifted. The air was colder, the silence louder. I still performed my duties: the morning coffee, the press suit, but the compliance was gone. It was replaced by a clinical detachment. I was performing a role until I could rewrite the script entirely. My first move wasn't grand. It was small, administrative, and utterly invisible to him. I had spent years under his legal thumb, every asset, every signature tied up in his intricate, protected network. But he'd missed the single, critical vulnerability, the one document I'd inherited from my mother's side that stated I had sole, independent authority over the Vanguard Trust. He thought it was an empty inheritance, a sentimental gesture. He was wrong. It was the key to my liberation. I spent the next 3 days in the home office, but not sketching or painting, which was his assumption. I was on secure lines, liquidating minor holdings Adam didn't know existed, and transferring the first layer of seed capital into a newly established ironclad holding corporation, the Meridian Group. Amelia, he called from the living room on the 4th night, snapping me out of a complex conference call with my newly retained, highly discreet legal team. Are you going to make dinner? Or are you just going to stare at that screen all night? His voice was a challenge. Before, I would have dropped everything, apologizing profusely. I already ordered takeout, Adam, I replied, not looking up, my voice flat. And I'm working. That stopped him. The silence that followed was heavy. He wasn't used to hearing the word working applied to me unless it was applied to my interior decorating. He walked into the office, standing in the doorway, analyzing me like a faulty appliance. Working on what, exactly? Your latest charcoal sketch of a bowl of fruit? I finally looked up, letting a tiny, calculating smile touch my lips. No. I'm reviewing some contracts. Contracts? His suspicion finally pricked through his arrogance. What contracts? Who are you talking to? Did Mark call you about the Dinsmore bid again? He was suspicious, but his suspicion was lazy. He immediately projected his own world onto me, assuming I was trying to eavesdrop on his business, not build my own. It's nothing you need to worry about, Adam, I said, leaning back in my chair. It's personal. And it's covered by an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. I watched the words hit him. Personal. Ironclad. He hated not knowing. He hated not being in control. He started pacing. Amelia, everything you do is connected to me. Your name, your reputation, your life. There are no secrets in this marriage. There are always secrets, Adam, I corrected him, my voice low and even. You just choose which ones you want to see. His suspicion intensified, but he was looking in the wrong direction. He spent the next week monitoring my phone calls, checking my email history for keywords like divorce or lawyer. He was terrified I was planning to leave him a fear rooted in vanity, not affection. He never once checked my bank statements, believing the joint account was all I had access to. He never checked the Vanguard Trust documents, believing they were worthless sentimental paper. I was his blind spot. Days passed. I continued to pull the threads of my life out of his tapestry. I secured an executive suite downtown under the name A. Meridian, and began interviewing CEOs, men and women far more ambitious and ruthless than Adam to run the newly funded Meridian Group. My mandate to them was simple: target Adam's company, Ares Dynamics, and acquire or dismantle its most valuable assets. I was setting the battlefield. I was positioning the pieces. And Adam was focused on whether I'd ordered organic spinach for the grocery delivery. One evening, he tried to corner me again, the suspicion in his eyes mixed with a strange kind of demanding curiosity. We were in the kitchen. "You're different, Amelia," he said, folding his arms. "You're distant. What are you hiding? Tell me what this is about." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt pity not for myself but for the depth of his impending fall. "I'm not hiding anything, Adam," I said, picking up my car keys. "I'm just securing my future." "Where are you going?" he demanded. "I have a meeting," I stated simply. He stepped in front of the door, his face darkening. "You will not walk out that door and keep secrets from me. I am your husband. I provide for you. You owe me an explanation." I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out a small, heavy silver key, the key to the new office, the key to the life he didn't know about, and I placed it gently on the marble counter. "Adam," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "you said I was a nobody. You said I had nothing. You taught me the value of being financially invisible. Now I'm just putting that lesson into practice." I walked past him, a movement that felt like breaking free of chains. He asked me to sit down and be silent. I had stood up and started a war instead. Walking out that door, leaving Adam standing there paralyzed by his own disbelief, felt like shedding an old skin. But the freedom was sharp, laced with the bitterness of the injustice I was now determined to expose. My meeting that evening wasn't with a client. It was with a private investigator I'd hired 3 weeks earlier, before Adam's nobody remark, a preemptive move fueled by years of unease. His name was Elias, and he specialized in complex financial forensics. We met at a dim, nondescript bar deep in the financial district. I handed him the last piece of the puzzle, a faded legal document related to the initial setup of the Vanguard Trust, signed 10 years ago, right when Adam and I were getting married. "I need to know exactly how much the trust was worth at the time of my mother's passing," I told Elias, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I need to know every single transaction tied to the original asset portfolio." Elias was a man of few words. He took the document, scanned it quickly, and raised an eyebrow. "This looks like a standard estate disposition, Amelia." "Why the secrecy?" "Because Adam told me it was essentially worthless, a few $100,000, tied up in old real estate and mutual funds that were too complicated to manage. He advised me to sign over the management to his firm for simplified handling shortly after the wedding." I was grieving. I signed. I looked down at my hands. The shame of that naivete still burned. "I need to know if he lied," I finished. "I need to know the true value." The next day, Elias called me. He didn't use an encrypted line or a coded message. He simply told me to meet him in a park in Tribeca, near the children's carousel. The casualness was jarring. When I arrived, he didn't waste time. He slid a thick, bound report across the park bench. "Adam didn't just lie, Amelia," he said, his voice flat. "He didn't just mismanage. He performed a sophisticated, calculated theft." I opened the report. The first page contained the original valuation. I felt the breath leave my lungs. Adam had told me the trust was worth maybe $500,000. The report stated the true valuation at the time of my mother's death was $18 million, primarily in undeveloped land on the city's periphery that had since exploded in value. But that wasn't the betrayal. The true twist was in the disposition. Elias pointed to a footnote on a transfer sheet, dated 6 months after our wedding, and 4 months before Adam launched Ares Dynamics. "When you signed over the management of the trust assets to his holding company, Adam didn't simplify the handling," Elias explained. He leveraged the entire $18 million portfolio as collateral to secure the initial venture capital for Ares Dynamics. He didn't build his company from the ground up, Amelia. He built it on your silent, stolen foundation. My hand trembled, clutching the report. The vertigo was overwhelming. It wasn't just a betrayal of marriage. It was a financial rape, a decade of my life, my potential, and my family's legacy used as a hidden, interest-free loan to fuel his ego and his empire. He didn't just call me a nobody. He engineered a reality where I couldn't be somebody, by stealing the very assets that defined my worth. Every luxury I enjoyed, every condescending glance he threw my way, was funded by my own hidden wealth. He signed the documents himself, forging or heavily obfuscating the asset transfer codes. Elias continued. He systematically dissolved the trust's true holdings and replaced them with high-risk, illiquid stocks in his own company, stocks that are currently underwater, which is what you saw with the Montclair deficit. That's why he panicked when I brought up the financials. He wasn't worried about losing money. He was worried about me following the trail back to the original, catastrophic sin. The total value he effectively stole, leveraging the collateral and liquidating assets, is likely closer to $25 million today. Elias concluded. I couldn't speak. I looked at the carousel, spinning cheerfully, its music mocking the darkness I felt. Adam hadn't just humiliated me. He hadn't just cheated me. He had incarcerated me in his own fraudulent success. I closed the report, the leather cover cold under my hand. Elias, I said, the name sounding foreign, my voice low and terrifyingly steady. Can the original assets, the land, the high-value stocks, be traced and reclaimed? Can we prove the fraudulent leverage? It will be legally messy, complex, and public, Elias warned. He is very well protected. Good, I replied. I don't want messy. I want surgical. I don't want public exposure yet. I want control. I stood up, the park suddenly feeling too small for the scope of my new mission. I finally understood the weapon I held, the Meridian Group, my newly established company, funded by the untouched portion of the Vanguard Trust. Adam built Ares Dynamics on my money. I would use my remaining money and his catastrophic arrogance to tear it down. My betrayal was not an accident of love. It was the calculated foundation of his entire life. And I was going to dismantle that foundation piece by piece. I walked away from the park bench, the report tucked securely beneath my arm. I was no longer the heartbroken wife. I was the CEO of a covert operation dedicated to justice. I called my lead contact at the Meridian Group, Miss Davies, a woman known for her icy efficiency. Miss Davies, I dictated, staring at Adam's massive corporate tower in the distance. I want a detailed, aggressive acquisition plan for Ares Dynamics. Focus on their debt structure and their most valuable intellectual property. I want a proposal on my desk tomorrow morning. And one more thing. I want the acquisition to be announced on the day of Adam's 10-year Ares Dynamics anniversary party. I want him to watch his empire die while he's celebrating its life. The command I gave Miss Davies to time the acquisition for his anniversary party was the cold, hard proof that I was done with sadness. My heart was still a bruised, hollow thing, but the emptiness had been filled by purpose. I returned to the penthouse, the air heavy and stagnant. Adam was sitting in his leather chair, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, a study in forced composure. He was waiting for an apology, a breakdown, a return to the docile wife. Amelia, he said, his voice dangerously smooth. This is childish. You had a bad day. I said some things I didn't mean. Let's reset. I walked past him and into the bedroom. I started packing a small suitcase, not for good but for the new life that required a separate physical address. I'm not resetting, Adam, I said, without turning around. And you meant every word. The only thing you regret is the reaction you got. He followed me, his control breaking. Where are you going? You can't just leave. We have a life here. My reputation. Your reputation is built on a lie. Adam, I interrupted, finally turning. I didn't raise my voice. The calmness was my weapon. You've been living on stolen credit. You used my mother's legacy, the Vanguard Trust, as collateral for Ares Dynamics. You didn't just mismanage. You committed fraud. He went white. Not a subtle paleness but a stark, shocking lack of color. This was the moment he realized I had crossed the boundary he thought was impenetrable. He didn't deny it. The denial he'd prepared, the too complicated for you excuse, died on his lips. Instead, his eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of my knowledge, for the enemy that betrayed him. "Who told you that?" he hissed, stepping closer. "Elias? No, he's too far down the chain. Who is your lawyer? Who are you talking to? You think you can blackmail me, Amelia? You have no idea the legal power I possess. I have no lawyer, Adam. I have documentation. I lied about the lawyer, but the rest was true. And I don't need to blackmail you. I just need to make sure I reclaim what's mine." With interest, the shock gave way to fury, a desperate, cornered animal rage. He lunged for my purse, searching for the report I no longer carried. "You are nothing without me. You will lose everything. Your name is toxic if you cross me." I simply stepped back, letting him search and fail. His panic was intoxicating. This was the emotional fallout. It wasn't the heartbreak of finding out he loved someone else. It was the crushing weight of realizing the person I loved had deliberately, coldly, and systematically destroyed my financial identity for his own gain. My sadness was turning into stone. I took my small bag, walked out, and spent the night in the newly acquired, discreet Meridian Group executive apartment. It was minimal, functional, and completely untainted by him. I felt safe there, not physically, but financially. The next few days were a blur of strategy. I spent hours with Miss Davies, who was a formidable woman. I told her the full story, not for sympathy, but for motivation. Her cold eyes lit up with professional fire. "He played a long game, Amelia," she said, reviewing Elias's report. "We will play a faster, cleaner one. Leverage his illiquidity. Attack his secondary, high-risk assets first. Use his own arrogance as a pressure point." We started buying up small, critical shares of Ares Dynamics subsidiary companies slowly, invisibly, through multiple shell corporations, designed to look like routine market movements. We weren't building a pile of shares, we were building a landmine. Meanwhile, Adam was trying to lure me back with manipulative affection. Flowers arrived. Texts about missing me arrived. He was trying to re-establish the dynamic of dependency. I knew this was his strategy. Make me feel loved. Make me feel safe, then make me forget I was ever brave. I sent one simple reply to his text. "I'm not coming home until the Vanguard Trust is fully audited and the missing funds are accounted for." He exploded in a torrent of furious calls, but I never picked up. I was done with his noise. On the morning of the 7th day, Elias called again. He had another discovery, not about the money, but about the cheating, the kind of simple, ugly marital betrayal that Adam had kept hidden behind the colossal facade of his financial theft. "Amelia, I have something that will change your mind about how much he regrets things," Elias said cautiously. "The Montclair account manager, the one tied to that Q3 loss you asked about at the party?" "Yes?" I prompted, bracing myself. "Her name is Sarah Vance. And she isn't just a business partner. She's been living in his secondary Long Island property, paid for with Ares Dynamics funds, for the last 9 months. The Montclair loss? It was a payoff to cover a lavish, fraudulent gift to her." My vision tunneled. The financial betrayal was monumental, but the sheer petty, cheap deceit of the affair, having my wealth fund his mistress's life, was a sickening final insult. He didn't just steal my fortune. He used it to build his mistress a gilded cage. And now, the true battle, the one rooted in absolute vengeance, was about to begin. The Montclair account manager, Sarah Vance. The mistress. When Elias revealed her name, the rage wasn't a hot burst, it was ice, spreading from my core. The financial betrayal had been about power. The affair was about disrespect. Adam hadn't just stolen my legacy. He had used the proceeds to rent a lavish life for another woman, while telling me I was a nobody. "Find everything on Sarah Vance," I told Elias that morning, sitting in the Meridian office. The city spread out beneath me like a target map. "I want her habits, her contacts, her weaknesses. She is now an asset in our strategy." Elias looked uncomfortable. "Amelia, we were focusing on corporate fraud. This is getting personal." "It has always been personal, Elias," I corrected him, my voice steel. "Adam used corporate funds to secure her silence and her comfort. That makes her a fraudulent beneficiary of stolen funds. And that makes her a point of leverage against him. We use everything he touches." Miss Davies, my Meridian CEO, was far less squeamish. She understood power dynamics. "The affair gives us emotional high ground, Amelia. The public loves a cheated spouse who fights back. But strategically, we focus on the transaction. She pointed to the complex chart outlining Ares Dynamics' organizational structure. We have been buying up subsidiary shares. Now we attack the debt. Adam has been over-leveraged for months, using high-interest, short-term bonds to stay afloat since the Montclair deficit. The plan solidified. It was two-pronged, the financial demolition and the controlled, devastating personal exposure. I want the Meridian Group to anonymously acquire his largest upcoming bond payment liability. I instructed Miss Davies. The $10 million due in 2 weeks. Make sure he has no idea who the new creditor is. The goal was simple: take control of his debt. Adam had to pay me back. And when he failed, which he would, thanks to his liquidity crisis, I, as his unknown creditor, would have the legal right to force the sale of his assets. The irony was a bitter, satisfying taste on my tongue. He would be fighting his own money, his own legacy, wielded by his silent wife. I knew Adam. He would try to secure the payment through an emergency loan. He was too arrogant to believe he couldn't talk his way out of anything. He'd approach every major bank. When he comes knocking, I told Miss Davies, a faint smile touching my lips, I want every financial institution in New York to reject him simultaneously, coordinate with our contacts. Make the money dry up. That requires immense coordination, Amelia, Miss Davies warned. I have $25 million reasons to believe we can do it, I countered. I had to maintain the charade at home. I still hadn't officially moved out, preferring the strategic advantage of observing him. I returned to the penthouse, but now, the dynamic was reversed. I was the observer, he was the subject. Adam, terrified I was contacting a divorce lawyer, tried to play the contrite husband. He poured me wine. He spoke softly. Amelia, please, he pleaded one night, grabbing my hand. Let's be rational. What if I return the money? What if I put the trust assets back? Can we just go back to the way things were? His desperation was a performance. He didn't want to fix the marriage. He wanted to silence the threat. The way things were? I asked, pulling my hand away. You mean, the way I was a convenience? The way I was a nobody? No, Adam. We can't go back. Because now, I know the difference. He didn't realize that in asking to return the money, he had just confessed the fraud. I let him talk, letting him dig his own hole, using my phone to secretly record our conversations for my legal team. Every sob story, every fake regret, was a future exhibit. The hidden secret had surfaced. Adam was actively planning a desperate financial maneuver to cover the impending bond payment. He was on the phone constantly, his voice tight and frantic. I watched him stress and I knew my plan was working. The pressure was building. 1 week later, Miss Davies called me into her office. She handed me a printed document. We successfully acquired the bond liability, Amelia, she announced. The $10 million debt is now held by a holding company owned by the Meridian Group. The payment is due in 5 days. Adam's debt is now entirely owed to you. I looked at the paperwork, a small, innocent-looking stack of papers that contained the entire future of his company. Adam was about to run up against a brick wall of his own making, and I was the architect. He thought he was running his empire. He was actually just running out of time. 5 days. That was all the time Adam had left until the $10 million bond payment was due, a payment now owed directly to the ghost corporation I controlled. The pressure was a physical thing in the penthouse. Adam's desperation was a feast for my strategic mind. He was frantic, pacing, shouting into the phone, his usual polished veneer dissolving into sweat and fury. He was calling his contacts, the bankers, the investors, the friends he had cultivated over a decade. I sat in the kitchen, sipping herbal tea, observing the slow-motion collapse. I was still wearing the mask of the quiet, slightly eccentric wife, but now I held the wire cutters. Amelia, have you seen my private ledger? The brown one. Did you move it? He demanded, tearing through the office. I haven't touched your things, Adam, I replied calmly. Why are you panicking? Just call your primary bank. They always handle your capital injections. He sneered. They're being unnecessarily slow. Something is off. Every damn bank I call, Deutsche, Morgan, Chase, they're all dragging their feet, citing internal risk reviews. It's unprecedented. It wasn't unprecedented for the Meridian Group. Miss Davies and her team had executed the money dry up flawlessly. Every major financial institution had received an anonymous, highly detailed analysis showing Ares Dynamics' true, alarming level of debt exposure, and more critically, the illiquidity tied to the Vanguard Trust collateral. Adam wasn't being rejected, he was being quarantined. I watched him drop into a chair, rubbing his temples. He looked old, defeated, and utterly confused. His arrogance had made him too predictable. He believed success was eternal. Maybe you should just sell off one of the Long Island properties, Adam, I suggested, my voice dripping with fake concern. The one near the coast? I hear that market is still strong. He shot me a dark look. He couldn't sell that property not without relocating Sarah Vance, and potentially exposing the Montclair fund transfer that purchased it. He left the penthouse that afternoon, abandoning his dignity and rushing to Ares Dynamics headquarters. He thought if he could just get face to face with his biggest bondholder, he could charm, threaten, or bribe his way to a 72-hour extension. He had no idea that the bondholder's representative was Miss Davies, waiting in a sterile, windowless conference room, ready to deliver the first legal blow. That night, I received a coded text from Miss Davies. The extension was granted. But the collateral demands are non-negotiable. Adam thought he'd bought himself time. He had actually just mortgaged his soul. His new collateral. He was forced to sign over the intellectual property rights to Ares Dynamics' most innovative new software product, a proprietary trading algorithm worth hundreds of millions, as security for the next 48 hours. Meridian now controlled the crown jewel of his empire. I poured myself a glass of expensive champagne I knew was bought with my original trust money, and toasted the silent city lights. He thought he was playing for time. I was playing for ownership. 2 days later, the tension was unbearable. Adam returned late, smelling of desperation and cheap takeout. He was drunk, angry, and finally, he turned the full force of his blame on me. "This is your fault," he slurred, leaning heavily against the doorway. "Since you started asking your ridiculous, uneducated questions, everything has gone south. You're the jinx, Amelia. You're poison." He started smashing things: a small sculpture, a crystal vase. It was the first time he'd allowed his physical violence to surface, the manifestation of his crumbling control. I stood still, watching the destruction with a chilling sense of satisfaction. He wasn't hurting me, he was destroying his own expensive possessions. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Amelia," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I can crush you. I can make your life a legal hell for 10 years. You want to fight? Fine. But you will lose everything you think you have." I walked toward him, stepping over the shattered glass. I was inches away, my eyes locked on his frantic, terrified gaze. "You already took everything, Adam," I whispered. "You took my name, my mother's legacy, and my security. You made me a nobody. There is nothing left for you to take." I let the weight of that truth hang in the air. He was threatening a woman who believed she had already lost it all. That night, I finally gathered the last of my necessary personal effects. I left the small suitcase, but I took the final undeniable piece of evidence Elias had provided: not the financial documents but a thumb drive containing high-resolution photographs. Adam and Sarah Vance, hand in hand, stepping off a private jet in the Hamptons, a trip funded by the very corporate account he'd told me was under review. I had the financial leverage. Now, I had the undeniable, public proof of his personal deception. The next chapter wouldn't be about strategy. It would be about absolute, devastating exposure. I was already on the phone with Miss Davies, finalizing the legal filing that would allow Meridian to foreclose on Adam's IP if he missed the final bond payment in 48 hours. The flash drive with the photographs of him and Sarah was burning a hole in my pocket. I was ready to execute the twin attacks: financial collapse and public disgrace. Then, Elias called again. His voice was strained, tighter than I'd ever heard it. "Amelia, I found something. Something about the Vanguard Trust documents that changes everything. It's not just Adam's fraud, it's a deeper conspiracy." I felt a sudden, sickening lurch. "What is it, Elias? Speak plainly." "The initial Vanguard Trust was set up by your mother, 10 years ago, right before she died. She placed the assets, the $18 million, into Adam's management, yes, but she didn't do it blindly. There was an override clause written into the original deed." I waited, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. The clause stated that if Adam's management failed, or if he attempted to leverage or liquidate the core real estate holdings before a 10-year maturity date, which happens next month. By the way, the entire trust control would automatically revert back to the primary beneficiary, my name, Amelia, without the need for legal arbitration. But Adam changed the terms, I insisted. He replaced the holdings and used them as collateral. We saw the documents. Yes, Elias said slowly, Adam changed the terms in his files. But the original, notarized deed, the only one that matters in court, the one your mother's attorney held, was never amended. Your mother wasn't naive. She knew her husband was a risk, and she protected you. So why had Adam moved with such confidence? If the real deed was still valid, all the documents Adam had shown me were worthless forgeries theater designed to keep me compliant. He hadn't just committed fraud. He had actively hidden the escape hatch my mother had built for me. Where does the betrayal twist come in, Elias? I asked, a new, sharp urgency in my voice. The original notarized deed was sealed and held by the firm of Preston and Gray, Elias explained. The lead partner on the estate was a man named Arthur Preston. The name struck me like a physical blow. Arthur Preston. I knew that name. Arthur Preston, I repeated, the sound thin and far away. He's Adam's oldest friend. His best man. The man who introduced us. The betrayal was not just Adam's. Elias confirmed my horrifying realization. Preston was Adam's co-conspirator. He was the one who suppressed the legitimate deed and provided the fabricated fraudulent management contract that you signed. He wasn't just my mother's attorney. He was Adam's mole, placed there to ensure the theft was fully insulated from day one. I felt a profound, chilling sense of violation. This wasn't a sudden mistake or an emotional lapse. This was a decade-long, calculated conspiracy engineered by the two men I had trusted most in the world. The man who stood next to Adam at the altar, smiling at me, had been holding the original deed that proved they were robbing me blind. My entire marriage was a theatrical production designed to secure my capital. I sat down hard in the executive chair. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that my mother, in her dying act of protection, had been betrayed by the man she trusted to protect me. And that betrayal had been carried out by the same man who swore an oath to my happiness. The scope of the vengeance had just widened. Adam's destruction was no longer enough. Arthur Preston, the smiling accomplice, the man who pretended to be my friend, had to pay the price too. Elias, I instructed, my voice flat and devoid of emotion, immediately secure a deposition date for Arthur Preston. We don't file the Vanguard fraud suit yet. We hit him with a breach of fiduciary duty and misrepresentation of estate documents suit first. We expose the lawyer, then we dismantle the thief. I looked at the thumb drive with the pictures of Adam and Sarah. That was the personal weapon. The discovery of Preston's involvement was the nuclear one. We need to create such an immense legal and public crisis around Arthur Preston that Adam can no longer rely on his protection. I explained to Elias. When Preston starts to drown, Adam will panic and turn on him. They will destroy each other. The plan for single revenge was insufficient. This required mutual annihilation. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the city at Adam's building, and then across town to the prestigious tower where Arthur Preston's firm operated. They were two towers of arrogance, now connected by a single catastrophic lie. I picked up the phone again and called Miss Davies. Hold the foreclosure filings, I commanded. We have a new priority. I need you to initiate a discreet but aggressive review of every single client file Arthur Preston has touched in the last 10 years. He made a career out of protecting Adam. I want to see how many other clients he sacrificed for Adam's gain. Adam thought he had a friend in high places. I was about to turn that friendship into a deadly liability. The plan had evolved from justice to execution. It was no longer about getting my money back. It was about systematically deconstructing the lives of the two men who had conspired to steal my potential. Arthur Preston and Adam, the architect and the thief. I sat with Miss Davies and Elias for an entire day, mapping out the strategy on a massive whiteboard, using military precision. We called it Operation Phoenix because Adam and Preston were about to burn, and I intended to rise from the ashes of their destruction. The goal was to create a scenario where both men were so busy fighting for survival against independent, mounting threats, that they couldn't coordinate a shared defense. Preston is Adam's anchor, Miss Davies explained, pointing to the board. If we expose Preston's breach of fiduciary duty regarding the Vanguard Trust, his entire career implodes. Lawyers run on reputation. We make his toxic. We didn't file the suit publicly yet. Instead, we leaked, through anonymous sources, a series of highly specific, credible tips to the New York State Bar Association regarding irregularities in Preston's handling of a decade-old, high-value estate. The investigation had to start quietly, creating an internal pressure cooker he couldn't deflect with PR. And the other clients you mentioned? Elias asked. We find the clients Preston screwed over to help Adam, I stated. There are always collateral victims in a conspiracy this long. We anonymously fund their legal defense, arming them to file their own suits against Preston. He will face a wave of litigation from every direction, all seemingly unconnected. I wanted him suffocated by his own compromises. Adam was still panicking over the $10 million bond payment, unaware that his new creditor was me. His IP was collateralized to Meridian. We let the 48-hour extension run out. I instructed, Miss Davies, you will initiate the IP foreclosure, seizing the proprietary trading algorithm. That algorithm is what makes Ares Dynamics competitive. The market will see the loss of the IP as a catastrophic failure, Miss Davies confirmed. Ares stock will plummet instantly. Creditors will call in their lines of credit. It will trigger a liquidity death spiral. The company he built on my money would now die by my hand, strangled by the loss of the intellectual property I owned. I still needed the affair photos of Adam and Sarah Vance. They were the key to ensuring the collapse was emotional, not just financial. We release the photos, I decided. But not to the media yet. We send them, anonymously, to the wives of the other Ares Dynamics board members. The logic was ruthless. Adam's board members were highly conservative, family-oriented New York elites. The public scandal would hurt him, but the internal moral disgust from his peers, whose wives would now be demanding answers about Adam's moral judgment, would shatter his political support inside Ares Dynamics. They will force him out, I predicted. The board will fire him to save the company's reputation, thinking they can clean up the mess. But by then Ares will be a shell, and its best assets will belong to Meridian. I stood back, looking at the complex, interconnected web of destruction on the whiteboard. Every move was calculated, every consequence anticipated. I realized I wasn't the quiet artist anymore. The woman who had been called a nobody was now a tactician, driven by a cold, righteous anger. The planning was exhausting, but it provided a strange kind of peace. It was the structure I needed to survive the crushing emotional weight of the betrayal. I had lost my marriage, my friend, and my trust. But I had gained absolute clarity. It's time, I said, looking at Miss Davies. Initiate Phase 1. Send the anonymous tips to the Bar Association about Preston. And one last thing. I want a copy of the real Vanguard Trust deed, the one Arthur Preston suppressed, delivered to Adam's primary office today. No note, just the deed. Miss Davies looked surprised. Why, Amelia? Why tip him off now? I smiled, a genuine, chilling smile. Because I want him to know exactly who is orchestrating this. I want him to spend the next 48 hours realizing that the nobody he dismissed is the only thing standing between him and absolute ruin. I want him to fear me before I destroy him. The moment of silence was over. The execution had begun. The plan was perfect. Too perfect. Adam had the deed now. He knew it was me. He knew his friend Arthur Preston was under anonymous assault. I expected fury, threats, even an attempted legal injunction. What I received was far more insidious. I was in my Meridian office, reviewing the final foreclosure documents for Ares intellectual property, scheduled for filing in the morning. I felt a surge of triumph. The collateral damage to Adam would be instant and total. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go, but something urged me to answer. Hello? The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and utterly chilling. Amelia, this is Detective Reynolds. We need you to come down to the 17th precinct immediately. A precinct? Why? What's going on? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. It concerns Adam Harrington, the detective replied. He's been involved in an incident. A serious one. I drove to the precinct in a state of suspended shock. The entire building seemed to hum with an oppressive official silence. Detective Reynolds met me, his expression grave. He led me into a small, sterile interview room. Adam Harrington was found 2 hours ago, Reynolds stated, folding his hands on the table. He was driving his Bentley on the FDR Drive. He lost control, hit the barrier, and flipped the car. We believe alcohol was involved. I waited for the punchline, the fine, the arrest, the media scandal. He's currently in critical condition at Bellevue. But Amelia, that's not why you're here. Then why am I here, detective? Reynolds slid a black and white photograph across the table. It was the interior of Adam's wrecked car. Tucked into the passenger side door was a small, familiar manila envelope. We found this at the scene, Reynolds said. It contained a copy of the Vanguard Trust deed, the one naming you as primary beneficiary, along with a note, handwritten by Adam. A suicide note. Suicide. The word ripped through my carefully constructed composure. I stared at the photograph, at the small piece of paper that confirmed the horrifying truth. Adam didn't fight back with lawyers or threats. He hit me where I was most vulnerable, guilt and the legal system. The note, which Reynolds paraphrased, was a desperate, malicious final act. Adam claimed his financial ruin was not due to fraud, but due to a sudden, vindictive attack by his mentally unstable, vengeful wife, Amelia. He claimed he had been trying to pay the debts, but I had deliberately cut off his access to capital, driving him to despair and, ultimately, to take his own life. He took my narrative of justice and twisted it into a narrative of malicious persecution. His firm is already talking to the press. Reynolds continued. They're framing this as a domestic dispute that drove a successful man to the brink. They're making you the villain, Amelia. I realized the genius and the monstrosity of his countermove. If Adam died, the financial fraud charges would become moot. The narrative would immediately shift. I became the wife who destroyed her husband, forcing the world to pity him and villainize me. The Meridian Group's acquisition would look like a hostile, personal vendetta against a grieving widow. And the worst part? The note implicated me directly in his death, painting my strategic moves as cruel, personal attacks. He had used his own potential death as a weapon. Adam's lawyers have already filed an emergency injunction, Reynolds said, confirming my fears. They're using the alleged suicide attempt to claim he was operating under duress, temporarily insane. They are freezing all assets, including those recently seized by the Meridian Group, pending investigation into his mental state and my motive, I finished, the blood draining from my face. He's trying to make my entire campaign for justice look like a crime. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the linoleum floor. I felt dizzy, physically sickened not by the possibility of his death, but by the sheer magnitude of his final, manipulative betrayal. Arthur Preston's investigation had just started, the Meridian Group's foreclosure was frozen, and Adam, unconscious in a hospital bed, was now shielded by the sympathy of the public and the temporary insanity plea of the courts. My clean surgical plan had just collided with the messy, unpredictable violence of human malice. I had destroyed his world, but now, he was actively trying to destroy my reputation and my freedom. What would you do now? With your strategy frozen and the world turning against you, would you pause and defend your name or press forward? Tell me in the comments. Adam was in a medically induced coma, stable but critical. His condition didn't elicit pity from me, it elicited a tactical analysis. He had created the perfect shield, the sympathy of a victim and the legal defense of diminished capacity. I walked out of the precinct, the city lights blurring. The narrative was already shaping against me. My face, usually hidden, was starting to appear on every major news outlet, labeled with words like estranged, vindictive, and financially motivated. I called Miss Davies immediately. The injunction. Can they hold the IP foreclosure? Temporarily. Yes, she confirmed, her voice tight. The court granted a 48-hour freeze to review the mental state claim. His lawyers are brilliant, Amelia. They bought him time and PR leverage. I had to pivot. The financial pressure was stalled. The legal path was blocked. I had to use the one weapon that could pierce the armor of public sympathy, the truth about his character. Miss Davies, put a full hold on the IP foreclosure, I commanded. We wait for the 48 hours to expire. But we don't wait on the media strategy. I want the thumb drive the photos of Adam and Sarah Vance delivered. Not to the media, and not to the bored wives yet. I want them delivered anonymously to the New York Post's most ruthless gossip columnist. I knew the calculus. A suicide attempt spurred by financial ruin creates sympathy. A financial ruin spurred by stealing from his wife to fund his lavish mistress, followed by a staged suicide attempt to escape justice, creates absolute disgust. Within 12 hours the first bombshell dropped. The headline was merciless. The Bentley crash. Despair or deceit. Sources say Aries CEO's ruin rooted in $25 million wife betrayal. The story didn't mention the Vanguard Trust yet. That was for the court, but it introduced the mistress and the lavish Long Island home purchased with misdirected corporate funds. It painted Adam as a calculating fraud who had been caught. The white noise of sympathy immediately became a roar of scandal. Adam's lawyers, focusing on the suicide narrative, were blindsided. They had spent their first day briefing the press on my alleged persecution while simultaneously trying to manage the freeze. They were playing defense on the wrong field. The effect was instantaneous. Calls flooded Aries Dynamics. Board members, now terrified of a moral turpitude clause being invoked against the company, began demanding an emergency meeting. They didn't care about Adam's crash. They cared about their stock price plummeting because of his cheating scandal. But Adam was still shielded by the hospital bed. I needed to hit Arthur Preston now, while Adam was unable to communicate with him. Elias, I called my investigator. I need you to confirm that Preston has been officially contacted by the State Bar Association regarding the anonymous fiduciary complaint. Yes, Amelia, Elias confirmed. They opened a preliminary inquiry this morning. Preston is denying everything, claiming it's a smear campaign tied to the Aries situation. But they're taking it seriously. Good, I stated. Now, we file the first suit. The small one. The one exposing Preston's initial breach of trust on the Vanguard deed. The suit wasn't filed against Adam the comatose victim but against Arthur Preston, his best friend. The charge was specific: suppression of the primary Vanguard trust document for personal gain. The press, already rabid, instantly picked up on the connection. Not only did Adam steal from his wife, but his best man helped him do it. The betrayal story doubled in impact. I had effectively turned the heat up on Arthur Preston, forcing him to fight a multi-front war: the Bar Association, the civil suit, and the raging media scandal that connected him directly to Adam's moral failure. He was no longer Adam's shield, he was Adam's newest vulnerability. I knew what Arthur Preston would do. He would try to save himself. I stood at my office window, looking down at the hospital where Adam lay, and the courthouse where the filing against Preston was being processed. I felt the immense, sickening weight of the moral line I had crossed to achieve this, but there was no turning back. The next day, Arthur Preston, desperate to prove his innocence to the bar and save his firm, gave a televised statement. He vehemently denied suppressing the deed, but in his panic, he said one catastrophic thing: I acted only on the direct, aggressive instructions of my client, Adam Harrington. He stammered, throwing Adam, his best friend, completely under the bus. Any omissions were directed by Mr. Harrington, who personally assured me the matter was handled. In his attempt to save his reputation, Preston had just confirmed the conspiracy and provided the first on-record, independent confirmation of Adam's fraud. The thief and the architect had just turned on each other. Arthur Preston's betrayal of Adam was public, confirmed, and glorious. The entire legal community was recoiling. Aries Dynamics was in freefall, the IP foreclosure pending, and the board was mobilizing to fire Adam the moment the court freeze lifted. But the personal cost was catching up. The media pressure on me was intense. I was taking a rare moment of peace in a quiet corner cafe when my phone buzzed, an unknown number followed by a text. I know who you are. We need to talk. About Adam. And the property, Sarah Vance. She was cornered. Adam was silent, Preston was attacking, and the press was exposing her role in the fraud. She was desperate. I agreed to meet her in a public neutral location, a crowded hotel lobby in Midtown, where her theatrics would be constrained by witnesses. I needed to look her in the eye, the woman who had benefited from the decade of lies. She arrived late, nervous, but still maintaining the brittle polish of a woman who valued appearances. She was younger than me, blonde, sharp, and radiating a cheap kind of ambition. Amelia, she said, her voice strained, trying to adopt a tone of shared distress. Thank you for meeting me. This whole thing, it's a nightmare. I'm scared. You sound it, I replied, my voice flat, offering her no pity. Sit down, Sarah. Let's talk about the nightmare you helped finance with stolen funds. She immediately launched into denial, the performance Adam must have seen countless times. I had no idea about the trust. Adam told me he was restructuring assets. He said it was just business. He used me. I watched her face, searching for a flicker of genuine remorse, but found only self-pity. He used you? I asked, leaning forward, my voice dangerously soft. He gave you the Long Island house, the private jet trips, the Montclair account payoff. He gave you the comfort he stole from his wife and his marriage. I believe the word you're looking for is complicity. She bristled, her fear turning to defensiveness. You were boring, Amelia. You were a shadow. You gave him nothing. He deserved someone who saw his genius, not someone who questioned every expense. That was the core of their bond. Her affirmation of his self-delusion. His genius was built on my mother's money, Sarah, I stated, pulling out the Vanguard Trust original deed, the single document that proved my mother's foresight. I placed it on the table between us. He didn't need your genius. He needed my silence. And you helped him enforce it. She grabbed the deed, scanning the language, her eyes widening as she realized the depth of the fraud and the depth of the lie Adam had told her. She must have realized her entire relationship, her house, her security, was built on a time bomb that I now controlled. What do you want? She whispered, her voice finally breaking. You want the house back? You want me to disappear? I'll testify. I'll tell them about the Montclair account cover-up. I want the truth, Sarah, I said, cold and precise. You are an asset of Adam's fraudulent enterprise. The house and the gifts are subject to forfeiture. But I don't need your testimony right now. I need information. Adam built his company on the trust, but he had a secret personal safe, a place he kept critical files, separate from Ares Dynamics. Where is it? She hesitated, chewing her lip. He has a safety deposit box, downtown. At the old First Mutual branch. But the key is hidden. Where? In the penthouse, in the back of the fireplace hearth. Behind a loose brick. He always said it was his firewall. I didn't offer her a deal, a reprieve, or comfort. I simply took back the deed and stood up. Thank you for your honesty, Sarah, I said. Now, I suggest you retain a good lawyer. Because when the assets freeze lifts, you are going to be liable for receiving fraudulent gifts. I left her sitting there, her face shattered, looking at the truth I had delivered. I felt no satisfaction, only the icy clarity of progress. She was just another piece of wreckage from Adam's catastrophic ego. I went straight from the lobby to the penthouse. It felt wrong, a violation of the clean break. But the safety deposit box, the firewall, could contain the evidence to bypass Adam's insanity plea and expose the fraud so definitively that no court could ignore it. I walked to the massive stone fireplace, my heart pounding. I reached into the cold hearth, my fingers searching, until they scraped against the rough edge of a loose brick. I pulled it out. The key was there. Small, tarnished, and bearing the insignia of the First Mutual Bank. But tucked beneath the key was a single, folded piece of thick paper. It wasn't a document. It was a will. Adam's will. I unfolded it, my hands shaking. It was dated just 3 weeks ago, shortly after I confronted him about the Montclair account. The final clause, written in his own sprawling, arrogant hand, stated that upon his death, all assets including the controlling interest in Ares Dynamics would not pass to me, his wife, but to the Sarah Vance Irrevocable Trust. He didn't just steal my fortune. His final, desperate act was to ensure his mistress inherited the company built on my mother's grave. My confrontation had yielded the final, terrible piece of the puzzle. The thief was trying to give his kingdom to the accomplice. The will lay open on the glass coffee table, reflecting the stark city lights. Adam, even in a coma, was fighting me with weapons I hadn't anticipated. The will wasn't just a document. It was a final, poisonous message. Even if you win, you won't get my company. She will. I immediately contacted Elias, sending him photographs of the will and the First Mutual safety deposit box key. The complications were immense and immediate. The will is valid, Elias confirmed, his voice heavy with caution. It's signed, dated, and witnessed. If Adam dies, or if he is declared legally incapacitated, the entirety of his personal assets, including his controlling shares in Ares Dynamics, transfer directly to the Sarah Vance Trust. This bypasses the marital community property claims entirely. And the assets we seized? I asked, already knowing the answer. They are frozen, remember. And the will creates a new, incredibly powerful counterclaim. Sarah Vance, through her trustee, will argue that she is the rightful successor, and that the Meridian Group's actions are simply a malicious attempt to ruin Adam before his rightful heir can take over. Adam hadn't just changed the beneficiary. He had weaponized the entire succession process. The legal fight for the Vanguard Trust was complex enough. Now, I had to fight a dead man's will, a fraudulent lawyer, and a scorned mistress all at once. The news of the will created immediate tension within my own team. I arranged an emergency, tense meeting with Miss Davies and Elias. "Amelia," Miss Davies said, her face grim. "The board of Aries Dynamics was planning to side with you, the cheated wife, to save the company. Now, with the will, they see only more chaos. They don't want Sarah Vance, the woman at the center of the scandal, inheriting control. They are likely to back the original injunction and side with Adam's firm, simply to prevent a complete loss of control." Elias, my investigator, was the first to vocalize the moral difficulty. "We're fighting to expose fraud, Amelia. But if we continue to attack Adam while he's comatose and fighting for his life, and if the final outcome is that the company goes to the woman he was cheating with, it makes our narrative and your actions look vengeful, not righteous." He was right. I saw the doubt in their eyes. The moral line, already blurred, was now twisting into a knot. "My actions are vengeful, Elias," I admitted, my voice dropping. "But the foundation is righteous. Adam engineered a financial prison for me. He compounded that with theft, and now, with this will, he is trying to ensure that my suffering is his legacy. We need a clean win, Amelia," Miss Davies insisted. "We need something that proves he was deliberately operating in bad faith, even when writing the will. We need to crack that firewall. The First Mutual safety deposit box. It was the only remaining unknown. The key is right here," I said, pulling it out. "But we can't access the box without a court order, which will take weeks, and Adam's signature. And he is incapacitated." "Wait," Elias interjected, scanning the documents I'd sent. "Look at the will's witness signatures. The witnesses aren't professionals, they're from the Montclair account. He used employees to witness the will. And look at the date," I pointed out. 3 weeks ago, right after the Montclair loss and my confrontation. He had already planned his exit and Sarah's succession before the crash. The witness signatures gave us a path, however narrow. Elias realized that the bank itself, First Mutual, had strict protocols for safety deposit box access and documentation. If Adam had a secret, illegal cache of documents, the bank itself might have been unwittingly implicated in the cover-up. If the box contains illegal or fraudulent documents, Elias mused, the bank has a duty to report. We can't get a court order to open the box, but we might be able to pressure the bank's compliance department to investigate their own client. I looked at Miss Davies. "Can Meridian, through its anonymous holding companies, apply pressure to First Mutual?" She nodded slowly, a predatory glint returning to her eyes. "First Mutual does a large volume of business with our corporate partners. We can request an immediate internal review of Adam Harrington's account integrity, citing the public fraud allegations. It will spook them." We initiated the contact. The demand for an internal review of Adam's dealings at the First Mutual branch was sent through our highest level, most intimidating corporate channels. We were betting that the bank's fear of a massive regulatory scandal would outweigh their duty to a comatose, high-profile client. 30 minutes later, the call came back. It wasn't Elias. It was a panicked compliance officer from First Mutual. "Mr. Harrington's safety deposit box, number 419. We initiated a mandatory review. There are no assets, just dozens of files. And one of them implicates a major local politician in a massive corporate bribery scheme. This goes deeper than your husband, Amelia." The firewall wasn't just hiding Adam's truth. It was hiding a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the city. The safety deposit box, the firewall, was not Adam's escape plan. It was his insurance policy. A desperate cache of secrets designed to protect him not just from me, but from everyone. I was granted supervised access to the contents by the bank's terrified compliance team, who feared regulatory ruin more than they feared Adam. Elias met me in the vault. The box contained dozens of files, meticulously organized. They weren't Vanguard Trust documents. They were files on leverage. Adam hadn't just been using my money to build Aries Dynamics. He had been using Aries Dynamics as a high-stakes slush fund for powerful figures across the city. The primary file was marked Councilman Thorne, the bridge, Councilman Thorne was the powerful head of the city planning committee, the man who controlled all major public works contracts in New York. The bridge, Elias whispered, recognizing the file name. The new Hudson River Crossing project. It was the most expensive infrastructure bid in city history, plagued by rumors of corruption. We opened the file. Inside were audited bank statements, emails, and coded communication proving that Adam had used Ares Dynamics to secretly funnel $40 million in shell payments to offshore accounts controlled by Councilman Thorne. Adam wasn't just a white-collar thief. He was the financier for a major political corruption ring. The connection was immediate and terrifying. The $18 million Adam had stolen from me was the initial seed money that gave him the liquidity to start playing at this level. My mother's legacy had inadvertently funded a political conspiracy. This explains everything, I said. A cold realization settling in my bones. The reason the banks dried up wasn't just my doing. Thorne was probably pulling his own money out of Adam's sphere, fearing the exposure of the Montclair deficit. They were all afraid of the same collapse. Adam's crash wasn't just the culmination of my revenge. It was the result of the entire criminal enterprise eating itself. I instructed Elias to copy everything, every email, every statement, every coded ledger. This wasn't just evidence of fraud. This was leverage over the entire city. This changes the endgame, Amelia, Elias warned. If you release this, you aren't just taking down Adam. You're taking down City Hall. They will fight with every ounce of power they have. They started this fight, Elias, I countered, looking at the file, my hand steady. They used my life as capital. This is the only way to ensure Adam's suicide note and Sarah's will are rendered completely meaningless. Political ruin trumps corporate fraud. I called Miss Davies, who was waiting anxiously. Miss Davies put a full stop on the foreclosure. Forget the injunction and the will. We have found evidence of massive corporate bribery involving Ares Dynamics and Councilman Thorne. This is the new priority. Her hesitation was gone. The professional ambition returned, sharpened by the thrill of the scale. Political corruption. That gives us clean hands, Amelia. We are no longer the scorned wife. We are the whistleblower. Adam, lying in a coma, was no longer the primary villain. He was the key witness, the conspirator whose silence or death would protect a much larger, darker network. I realized then that my revenge wasn't just for me. It was for my mother, whose protective efforts were hijacked into a criminal enterprise. I had the ultimate leverage, but I had to deploy it carefully. If I went straight to the federal authorities, Thorne would bury the investigation. I needed to ensure the evidence hit the media and the authorities simultaneously, creating an unmanageable crisis. I looked at Elias. I need you to prepare 2 sealed packages. Package 1 goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office, detailing the corporate bribery. Package 2 goes to the same New York Post columnist who broke the mistress story. We are going to give the public a choice: pity the cheating, comatose CEO, or demand justice for the highest level of political corruption he financed. The public will choose justice. Just before we left the vault, I found one last item tucked into the back of Adam's box. It was a letter, penned years ago, from Arthur Preston to Adam, referencing the Vanguard Trust. It was dated a week before my wedding. Adam, the deal is set. Your new bride is protected on paper, but the real deed is safely locked away with me. Enjoy the honeymoon. The $18 million is yours to leverage. The sight of the handwriting, so casual, so completely sure of their conspiracy, filled me with a cold, final resolve. I had the evidence to destroy both of them, and the entire network they represented. The hour of retaliation was here. The packages were sent. The file containing the evidence against Councilman Thorne, Adam, and the entire bridge scheme was now simultaneously in the hands of the federal prosecutor and the most aggressive investigative journalist in the city. I didn't wait for the fallout in the Meridian office. I went to the courthouse. The 48-hour freeze on Ares Dynamics assets was set to expire at 11 a.m. I was there, personally, to watch the clock tick down. At 10:45 a.m., the first bomb detonated. The headline on the New York Post website was massive, unmissable. Ares CEO crash exposes $40 million City Hall corruption ring. The article was brutal. It used the evidence I provided: the coded ledgers, the offshore transfers, the connection to Councilman Thorne, to paint Adam not as a victim of marital strife, but as a central figure in a conspiracy that had fleeced the taxpayers of New York. the focus shifted from the vindictive wife to the courageous whistleblower who exposed the truth. The scene at the courthouse erupted into chaos. Adam's legal team, already blindsided by the Preston suit, was annihilated by the sheer scale of the new charges. The judge immediately convened an emergency session. At 11 a.m., the injunction expired. But before Miss Davies could file the IP foreclosure, the U.S. Attorney's Office stepped in. They didn't just freeze Adam's assets. They seized the entire company. Ares Dynamics was no longer a private corporation. It was now a crime scene, evidence in a massive federal corruption probe. "Justice is being served," Miss Davies murmured, standing beside me. "The government is taking him down faster than we ever could." But I wasn't finished. I still needed to ensure the two conspirators, Adam and Preston, suffered the full, personal consequences. The focus shifted to Arthur Preston. The federal investigation, using the evidence of the shell companies, immediately uncovered Preston's years of complicity in Adam's fraud, and now, his connection to Thorne. The state bar's inquiry escalated into a full, public disbarment hearing. Preston, facing prison and the absolute ruin of his reputation, folded entirely. He contacted the U.S. attorney, offering a full proffer testimony against Adam and Councilman Thorne in exchange for a lighter sentence. The sight of his frantic, arrogant face on television, confessing to suppressing the Vanguard deed and implicating Adam in the bribery, was the moment of complete personal victory. The man who had betrayed my mother's dying wish was now destroying his best friend to save himself. Simultaneously, the political hammer fell. Councilman Thorne, caught red-handed, resigned in disgrace, the FBI already seizing his records. The entire network of corruption began to unravel, all thanks to the secrets Adam had kept in his private vault. With Ares Dynamics seized and the fraud confirmed by Preston, Adam's malicious will leaving everything to Sarah Vance was rendered moot. A will cannot transfer ownership of seized, criminally derived assets. Sarah Vance was stripped of her inheritance and left to face the forfeiture of the Long Island home. Her role as the scorned heir evaporated. The court, now viewing the Vanguard Trust not as a marital asset but as the origin point of the corporate corruption, ruled swiftly. The original Vanguard deed, proving the override clause, was declared valid and enforceable. The original $18 million, plus 10 years of accrued interest, was ordered to be released to the primary beneficiary, Amelia Harrington. I didn't cheer. I simply looked at the judge's bench. The chaos around me was Adam's ruin, Arthur's ruin, Thorne's ruin. But for me it was quiet, absolute justice. I walked out of the courthouse, no longer looking at the city as a map of betrayal, but as a place I had successfully cleaned. Adam was still alive, unconscious, but he woke up later that week to a new reality. Stripped of his company, disowned by his peers, facing multiple federal indictments, with his best friend testifying against him. I went to the hospital one last time, not as his wife, but as the executor of his justice. I left a single message with his nurse, not to be delivered until he was conscious and lucid. The nobody wants her money back. And she took your crown jewels. The revenge was complete. Now, only the aftermath remained. The world didn't stop spinning. But my personal world had finally settled onto a stable axis. Adam's fall was absolute. He was conscious, stripped of his power, and facing federal charges, a humiliation far worse than any fate I could have engineered. Arthur Preston was disbarred and cooperating with the feds. Councilman Thorne was gone. The legal process that followed was swift and clean. Since Adam's assets were criminally derived and his personal finances were frozen, the divorce was finalized with surprising ease. I didn't ask for alimony. I didn't want a penny of his contaminated money. I asked only for the legal termination of the marriage and the complete, final release of the Vanguard Trust funds. I was finally, definitively, Amelia Harrington, independently wealthy woman, the initial $18 million, now compounded by 10 years of interest and freed from Adam's manipulation, was a staggering fortune, a symbol of my mother's foresight and my own hard-won freedom. I took Miss Davies and Elias out for a private dinner. Not a celebration but a moment of mutual recognition. They had been my instruments, and I owed them my professional freedom. I offered them both significant, controlling roles in the newly organized Meridian Group. Meridian is no longer an engine of revenge, I told them. It's an engine of ethical investment. We find the weaknesses in systems, but now, we build structures that protect the vulnerable. not exploit them. I moved out of the sterile executive apartment and into a small, sunlit loft in the West Village. It was deliberately modest, comfortable, and, most importantly, mine. It contained no ghost of Adam's arrogance or stolen capital. I bought a set of simple art supplies and began to sketch again. The quiet, domestic act of creation felt profound after the months of destruction. I looked at the charcoal sketches not of fruit bowls, but of the dramatic New York skyline. I saw Adam's seized tower, no longer a symbol of oppression, but a monument to consequence. The greatest victory wasn't the money, or Adam's ruin. It was the absolute, internal transformation. I was no longer the quiet woman who allowed herself to be belittled. I had found a core of strategic brilliance and resilience I never knew I possessed. I realized Adam had been right about one thing. I was invisible to him. But he confused my invisibility with incompetence. It was my ability to remain quiet, to observe and to act without warning that ultimately destroyed him. I hadn't spoken to Sarah Vance since the confrontation. But one afternoon, I received a thick, heavy envelope. It contained the deed to the Long Island house, the fraudulent gift Adam had purchased for her. She had signed it over to me, without condition. The only thing included was a handwritten note: "You were right. He was a thief. I'm starting over. Good luck." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. She had understood, too late, that I was not her enemy. Adam's deceit was the true villain. I sold the house immediately, donating the proceeds to a local women's shelter, washing the last vestige of Adam's corruption from my life. I sat alone that evening, looking at the skyline, thinking about the woman my mother must have been, a woman who anticipated her husband's greed and built me a fail-safe. My inheritance was more than money. It was a final, unconditional act of self-worth and protection. Adam was wrong. I was never a nobody. I was simply waiting to be discovered. And the man who thought he knew my price was the one who ultimately paid the highest cost. The silence was the sound of my life finally belonging only to me. But the story isn't over. There is one final, crucial truth I learned about the nature of betrayal and the price of peace. It's been a year since the crash, since the lawsuits, since the headlines faded. Adam is out on bail, facing trial, stripped of his fortune, his reputation a permanent casualty. Arthur Preston is a pariah. The city council has new leadership. And me? I am simply Amelia. The money is invested, managed ethically, and it provides a quiet, unshakable foundation. The revenge was a means to an end, a terrifying process that forced me to become the warrior I never wanted to be. The true resolution wasn't financial. It was the answer to the question Adam asked that night. "Sit down, Amelia, you're a nobody." The final truth I learned, the one I carry with me, is this: the person who tries to define your worth is usually the person most terrified of your potential. Adam had to believe I was a nobody because if I was a somebody, his entire life of lies collapsed. He wasn't protecting me from the finances. He was protecting himself with my ignorance. I learned that freedom isn't the absence of walls, but the knowledge of all the exits. My mother gave me one exit, and Adam's betrayal forced me to find the rest. Don't be afraid of the fight, or the darkness you might find within yourself when betrayed. Because sometimes, the vengeance is the only way to surgically remove the poison and save the host. You can be heartbroken and still be strategically brilliant. You can lose everything and still gain your soul. I still walk through the city, and sometimes I see the lights of Adam's seized tower. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel a quiet, profound pity for the man who thought money and control were the only metrics of success. He died the day he wrote that suicide note. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. If you've watched my life, my pain, my strategy and my triumph, and you still feel a connection to this fight for justice, then you know what you need to do. I laid my life bare so you wouldn't have to feel alone in yours. Don't just watch this story. Become a part of the community that believes in justice and consequence. Hit that subscribe button right now. Do it before you move on to the next video and forget the fire we just walked through together. And if you truly won't subscribe, I want to know why. Go into the comments and tell me why you're choosing to walk away from a story that resonated with your deepest fears of betrayal. I am rebuilding my life not on his foundation of fraud, but on my own foundation of truth. I use my reclaimed fortune not to live lavishly, but to fund small, quiet legal teams who help others who were silenced by men like Adam and Preston. The justice continues, even if the drama does not. The life I live now is quiet. It is mine. It is free. And it is completely, undeniably, somebody. Remember this. Never let a one give you a little definition of yourself. The quiet ones are the ones who always win the war.